Welcome back to Switzer. Given what we heard about the property market from John McGrath, from a property investment point of view, let's see how Margaret Lomas is playing this market. Margaret Lomas, what a joy.
Thank you. It's always a joy to be here with you, Peter.
It is. I think it's in the program enough, but I love it when someone drops out so I can drag you on. Yeah.
I'm the backup girl.
Yeah, you're the backup girl. But more importantly, it's at a time when people are talking housing bubbles. When you read that in newspapers, what do you say?
You know, it's funny, I was thinking about it when you asked me that question earlier. The very first time I came on this show a couple of years ago, you asked me what I thought of the housing bubble. And then a year later you asked me again, and I think you've asked me every year.
Yeah, that's right.
And every year I say to you, I don't think there's a housing bubble, and I don't think it's going to burst. I think what we do definitely have is quite a few areas of buyer frenzy at the moment.
Where are they?
Well, of course, it's Sydney, and buyer frenzy, believe it or not, still exists in Sydney, despite evidence that we're already really at the peak of the market and flattening out. Of course, there's always a suburb or two that would defy that comment, and so people think, oh, there's still some life left in the old girl yet. I do believe that there are many parts of Sydney where people, if they bought in the last 6 months or so, may have paid a little too much, certainly over its intrinsic value, and might hurt a little for a couple of years.
OK. Low rates, low interest rates and buyer enthusiasm. Is this the main reason why we're really hot to trot to buy properties?
I think there's a combination of things happening here, and I think the low rate environment is definitely helping people, most particularly investors, get into the market. I think in the month of July, 67% of all new home loans were given to property investors rather than homeowners. And I think that's probably one of the things that's fueling the buyer frenzy. But we also can't ignore the fact that investors sat for quite a long time from the GFC doing nothing. Because everybody told them that the property market was going to follow the Americans, it was going to crash.
No, I didn't say that.
You
didn't say that.
We didn't, but then, you know, we know where the experts and everyone else is.
Yeah, we're contrarians.
Exactly. And so everybody sat for a long time. And then I think what happened as rates started to go down and the property market didn't crash, suddenly investors said, well, enough is enough. It's never going to happen. We now don't believe the doomsayers. Let's give it a go after all.
The self-managed super fund interest in property, that's helped the investor market too, hasn't it?
So if we layer that over the top, absolutely. And unfortunately, I think too many people, and very many people who shouldn't, are using self-managed superannuation funds to buy property.
I think if someone's got $1 million in super and they want to take 300 of it and buy a place for, say, 500, they borrow 200, no problem at all.
But if you've got 80,000 and that's it, you shouldn't be getting a loan in order to go and buy property in your super.
That worries me a lot.
Me too.
Okay. The young couple play. A lot of people say, well, I want to live in Bondi, but I can't afford Bondi. But I can afford an apartment because I'm earning a lot as a foreign exchange dealer and my wife's a lawyer. Unlucky people are they? But I can't buy the place. But I can service the debt and get the tax deductions. What would you say to a young couple like that?
Well, I guess if a foreign exchange dealer and a lawyer don't have or can't save the deposit to buy a property, then
they've been living a life of foreign exchange dealers and lawyers.
And they do, I know. I've got children and some of them earn good money, but they live the life, and that tends to be what they do these days. But I guess the point to note is that it is very important to get on the property ladder at some stage. I think whether you're a share investor or a property investor or what you like, it's important to have a diversified portfolio and get on that property ladder. But it isn't as necessary these days to make that first rung on the property ladder a home of your own, especially since, and a lot of people are unaware of this, in most states you don't actually lose the first home buyer grant if your first property is an investment property. Or if you can buy 10 investment properties, and as long as you don't live in them for a continuous period of more than 6 months, you don't lose the first home owner's grant. And so that's an interesting thing to note. Now, because of that, and because of the fact that many of the areas that we aspire to live in or want to live in or that are close to our place of work, because most of those have yields at the moment of 2 and 3%, that means that in order to rent a property like that, it's much cheaper than paying the interest on a mortgage in an area like that. So it's quite acceptable, I believe, to rent where you would like to live, as long as you do get on that property ladder by becoming a landlord in an area that has good 5 and 6% yields and a lot of those growth drivers.
Okay, so you're saying live where you want to live, but then pick an area where tenants want to live, but is it also a good chance of capital gain and a decent yield?
Absolutely. Now, a lot of people still believe that the two don't go together, that if you get high rents, you're not going to get growth. If you get high growth, you're not going to get good rents, and that is, they're not mutually exclusive. There's most definitely many areas in Australia today where there's a family demographic, where there's a council that's pouring money into infrastructure, the population's growing faster than the national average, and where a median household income is growing faster than inflation. They're areas that are going to grow.
Margaret, when I was young and learning the property game...
Last year.
Yeah, I found that, for example, when we bought in Paddington, no one wanted to live in Paddington.
Yeah.
Then when Paddington took off, Darlinghurst was the next one, and then became Surrey Hills, and then became Newtown.
The ripple effect.
Yeah. The suburb next door, as long as there's not massive negatives like a nuclear plant right in the middle of it, is that still a pretty good yardstick to pick the next best area?
The ripple effect is a good yardstick to use, but it isn't enough on its own.
No.
What people don't understand about growth drivers, and I have people come to me all the time and say, I'm going to buy in Cairns because there's a new hospital, or I'm going to buy somewhere else because there's a new railway station. These things are definitely growth drivers, but if there's only single growth drivers, it's not enough. We need the concert of factors that make growth happen, and very often the ripple effect does work, but sometimes the ripple effect doesn't work. It depends what price point we're talking about.
Right.
So we have to understand that we're looking for areas that aren't necessarily the really ugly duckling suburbs, although some of those do turn into beautiful swans in the end, but it's areas where we can look at 5 and 6 different growth drivers that are working in concert together to make future growth possible.
I often ask this question, but it's one I want to always ask you. What are the silly things that people do when they go looking for an investment property?
Well, everything usually is what the silly things are. Often people want to go and have a look at that property first, and they choose according to what they have a gut instinct about, and we don't have a gut instinct about what makes a good investment property. We tend to think, well, let's buy in those areas that we want to live in ourselves, but in fact the best growth usually comes from those areas that are pre-hotspot, that are pre-blue chip, that aren't the areas that we aspire to live in.
I can remember people like John McGrath were telling me 5 years ago that Alexandria and place would be hot one day. And I said,
Everyone said in your dreams. What about Balmain? Everybody said that about Balmain, Redfern. Now, if we're looking up in Brisbane, there are plenty of areas at the moment that people are saying, in your dreams.
Name them.
Look, I don't know if I want to, because I'm looking myself at the moment.
Oh,
but
come on.
okay, old
For my
man.
viewers.
Look, everybody's talking about the Logan Shire. Let's point out that I was talking about that a good 7 years ago.
Yeah, John Edwards said Logan Village last week here.
I know, sorry, John, but I bought there for $85,000. It's already doubled once. It's going to double again in probably the coming 5 years. Anywhere around the Logan Shire, there's a lot of foreign money in Logan Shire, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of transport nodes. Plenty happening up there, and big population. It's all in that family.
And when John said the South East Queensland corner is good, Logan's a classic star in that
Logan
area.
is it. Anything in the Logan Shire, Crestmead, Kingston, Eagleby, you name it. There's dozens of suburbs there. I also like some of those coastal northern suburbs, just out and down a little bit from Caboolture, including Rothwell, Deception Bay, Scarborough.
How could you buy Deception Bay? Every time I go past Deception Bay.
Stop it. See, you're doing it again. If you had bought in Alexandria 5 years ago,
true.
you would have made some good money.
Exactly.
And these are areas that are still affordable, that people are buying in. They've got some good rental yields, but there's plenty happening around there.
One last thing, quantity surveyors. That was one of the first things you taught me.
Yes. Quantity surveyors are very, very important, because the $600 or $700 that you spend on a quantity surveyor's report, regardless of the age of your investment property, will usually be reaped back in tax breaks tenfold, but if it's a really old property, at least threefold. Get your quantity surveyor's reports done before the end of the financial year, you get all that money back in your tax.
Great stuff. Thanks for joining us, as always, Margaret Lomas. That's the show for tonight. Stick around for Margaret Lomas. You'd be just completely stupid if you didn't. So that's my show. See you tomorrow night.